The desert wind scraped sandpaper sounds against both walls of the stone gap. Cal crouched beside a small fire, his fingers working at the torn edge of a saddle strap, when he heard the low whistle. A figure appeared at the rim of the firelight-worn cloak, left shoulder wrapped in crude bandaging. She stopped several paces away and raised both bare hands to show she carried no weapon. "If you let me stay tonight," she said, her voice low but steady, "I'll bring you something no one else can. The location of hidden water veins, the names of those who drained them, and the oath I signed before the council elder to bring the truth into the light." She introduced herself. "I'm Tala. I'll let you rebandage my shoulder, but call out each move before you make it." Cal nodded. He set a cloth-wrapped heating stone near her hip and poured a small measure of water into a tin cup. She opened a canvas pouch and drew out a beaded string and a thin leather-bound notebook. "These are water markers and spring records. If I go alone through the night, I won't reach town in time. If I stay here, tomorrow morning we go to the town well together and speak the truth in front of everyone." The fire crackled. On the ridge above, wind whistled through old iron pipes. Cal looked at the ink marks in the notebook, then at the calm black eyes across from him. "All right," he said. "Stay and we'll tell the truth in a way it can survive." The heating stone held warmth long after the larger flames had settled to embers. Cal moved with deliberate care, announcing each step before his hands came near Tala's injured shoulder. She breathed shallow and even, her gaze fixed on the middle distance, and when he asked if the pressure was too much, she answered with a single word, "Manageable." He wrapped the clean cotton strip twice around her upper arm, tucked the end, and stepped back. She tested the range of motion, lifting her elbow, rotating her wrist, and gave a short nod. "Thank you," she said. She took another sip from the tin cup, then gestured toward the notebook, lying open on a flat stone. "The water ledger goes back 3 seasons. Every entry is dated. Every witness is named." Cal picked up the ledger and angled it toward the firelight. The handwriting was small and precise. Coordinates marked in degrees and paces, flow rates measured in gallons per hour, dates cross, referenced with moon phases. He recognized 2 of the signatures at the bottom of the first page, men who worked freight wagons through the basin and who would not risk their reputations on a lie. "Who took the water?" he asked. "Silas Dorn," Tala said. "He installed iron siphon pipes at 3 points along the eastern aquifer. No permit, no negotiation, no record filed with the land office. He's been pulling water for 8 months." Cal had heard the name. Dorn owned the largest freight company in the territory and had a hand in half the supply contracts that kept the smaller towns alive. He was the kind of man who could afford to pay lawyers by silence and wait out accusations until they lost momentum or credibility. He had built his reputation on being untouchable, and he had spent years proving it. "Why come to me?" Cal asked. "Because you don't owe him anything," Tala said, "and because I watched you refuse a bribe last spring when his foreman tried to buy your grain shipment under market rate. You told him to take his money and his insults somewhere else." Cal remembered. The foreman had left angry, and 2 weeks later a fence on Cal's property had been cut, and 20 head of cattle had wandered onto the open range. No proof, no charges, just the quiet tax that came with saying no to the wrong people. He had filed a report with the sheriff, who had shaken his head and said there was nothing he could do without evidence. Cal had repaired the fence himself and moved on, but he had not forgotten. "If we go into town tomorrow," Cal said, "Dorn will know within the hour. He'll have time to move the pipes, burn records, pay off anyone who might talk." "He'll try," Tala agreed, "but the hearing is set for noon the day after tomorrow. The land office clerk already filed the complaint. The elder council has the witness list. Dorn can move the pipes, but he can't move the soil compression around the installation points or the iron filings in the clay. The evidence is in the ground." Cal looked at her. "You planned this." "I plan to survive it," Tala said. "Survival requires preparation." She reached into the pouch again and pulled out a second item, a folded square of cloth marked with ink symbols. She spread it on the stone beside the ledger. It was a map, not the kind sold in general stores, but the kind drawn by someone who had walked every mile and tested every source. Springs were marked with circles, dry washes with broken lines, reliable wells with solid dots. 3 locations along the eastern edge, bore red X's. Those are Dorn's siphons, she said. If you want to see them before the hearing, we'll need to leave 2 hours before dawn. It's a 4-hour ride, and we'll need daylight to document what's there. Cal studied the map. The route she had drawn avoided the main freight road and used a series of dry washes and low ridges that would keep them out of sight. It was a good route, cautious, defensible, planned by someone who understood that being right was not the same as being safe. He folded the map and handed it back. "We leave at 4," he said. "Eat something now if you can. We won't stop once we're moving." Tala took a strip of dried meat from her pack and chewed it slowly. The fire burned low. On the far side of the stone gap, a coyote called once and went silent. Cal banked the coals and set his bedroll on the upwind side of the camp, giving Tala the space closest to the residual heat. He lay on his back and watched the stars wheel overhead, and he thought about the way truth moved through the world. Slow, fragile, and expensive. Somewhere in the dark, iron pipes were draining water that belonged to no one and everyone. Somewhere in town, Silas Dorn was sleeping in a bed that cost more than most men earned in a year. And here, in a stone gap with a fire the size of a man's hat, two people were trying to carry a ledger and a map into the light. The heating stone cooled slowly. By the time Cal closed his eyes, it was just warm enough to notice. A small, decent thing in a night that required it. He woke once in the deepest part of the night and heard Tala breathing steady and even across the fire. He listened for other sounds, horses, voices, footsteps, and heard nothing. The silence was complete. He closed his eyes again and slept until the stars began to fade. Morning came without color. The sky was pale gray, the air cool and still. Cal woke Tala with a low word and a touch to her boot, then stepped back while she sat up and tested her shoulder. She moved carefully, but without hesitation, rolling the joint, flexing her fingers. Satisfied, she reached for her canteen and took 2 small swallows. 3 rules, Cal said. Shallow breaths when we're near the siphon site's iron dust can scar your lungs if you pull it deep. Small sips, steady intervals will be in the sun by mid-morning, and I don't want either of us cramping. And silence with signals. If I raise a fist, you stop. If I point, you look. If I drop flat, you do the same. Tala nodded. Understood. They broke camp in less than 10 minutes. Cal scattered the fire pit and swept the sand smooth with a juniper branch. Tala rolled her blanket tight and secured it to her pack with cord that showed no slack and no excess. They worked without speaking, each movement efficient and deliberate, and when they were finished, the site looked like nothing more than a place where the wind had paused. Cal saddled his horse and checked the saddlebags. Water, hardtack, medical kit, coil of rope, folding shovel. Tala walked beside him, her pace steady despite the injury. He offered her the stirrup, but she shook her head and gestured toward a low boulder. She used it to mount without putting weight on her left arm, settling into the saddle behind him with her good hand braced against his shoulder. "Tell me if the gait is too rough," Cal said. "I will," Tala replied. They rode north along the dry wash, the horses' hooves muffled by sand. The wash was 15 feet wide and lined with smooth stones that had been tumbled by water that no longer came. Tala leaned close and spoke just loud enough for Cal to hear. "The stones tell you where the water was," she said. "Size, shape, how they're sorted. Big stones at the bends, those are high flow marks. Small stones in flat sections, those are slow spots where silt could drop out. No stones at all means the wash is new or the water left a long time ago." Cal looked at the stones as they passed. He had ridden this wash a dozen times and had never thought to read it. He noticed now that the largest stones were clustered at the outer edges of each curve, exactly where the fastest water would have pushed them. The pattern was clear once someone pointed it out. "What about the plants?" he asked. "Roots," Tala said. "Mesquite roots go deep 30 feet or more. If you see mesquite, there's water below, even if it's slow. Creosote is shallower, 10 to 15 feet. Prickly pear means surface moisture, maybe from fog or rare rain, but not reliable. And if you see nothing, just bare rock and salt crust, then the water left before your grandfather was born." They passed a stand of mesquite, the branches gray and twisted. Cal filed the information away. It was the kind of knowledge that could save a life or end an argument, depending on who held it and when. The wash opened onto a low plain dotted with creosote and choa. The sky was brighter now, pale blue with high, thin clouds. In the distance, a line of darker hills marked the edge of the basin. Tala pointed toward a gap in the hills. "The first siphon is there," she said. "We'll approach from the west, upwind. If anyone is there, we'll see their dust before they see ours." Cal adjusted their course. The horse moved at an easy walk, its ears forward, its breathing steady. The land was quiet, no birds, no insects, just the creak of leather and the soft percussion of hooves on hardpan. It was the kind of quiet that made a person pay attention, that turned every sound into information. They were 2 miles from the gap when Tala stiffened. Cal felt the change in her posture and reined in immediately. "Listen," she said. He heard it, a low metallic hum, faint but persistent, like wind passing over the mouth of a bottle. It was coming from the direction of the gap, steady and unnatural. "Iron pipe," Tala said. "The sound carries when the pressure is high. Someone is running water." Cal turned the horse and moved parallel to the gap, staying low behind a line of creosote. They covered another half-mile before Tala signaled him to stop. She dismounted carefully and crouched beside a cluster of pale stones. She brushed sand away from the base of the stones and revealed a small carved mark, 3 lines intersecting at angles. "Survey marker," she said. "This is the aquifer boundary. Everything east of this line draws from the same source. If Dorn's siphon is running, everyone downstream is losing pressure." Cal dismounted and knelt beside her. He could see faint depressions in the sand footprints, maybe a week old, leading toward the gap. Tala followed them with her eyes, then looked back at Cal. "We won't make it to the siphon and back before full light," she said. "If Dorn has men watching, they'll see us. We need to decide. Document what we can from here, and ride for town, or push closer and risk the encounter." Cal considered. The hearing was set for noon tomorrow. If they rode for town now, they would arrive by mid-afternoon and have time to prep witnesses, review maps, and coordinate with the land office clerk. If they pushed closer and ran into trouble, they might not arrive at all. The math was simple. The ledger and the map were enough. They did not need to hand Dorn an excuse to call them trespassers or troublemakers. "We go to town," Cal said. "The evidence is in the ledger and the map. We don't need to give him ammunition." Tala nodded. She stood and brushed the sand from her knees. Together they remounted and turned south, leaving the gap and its metallic hum behind. As they rode, Tala reached into her pack and pulled out a small cloth bag. She opened it and took out a handful of white stones, each the size of a thumbnail. She leaned down and placed one stone beside the trail, then another 50 paces later, then another 50 paces after that. "Trail markers," she said. "If we need to come back, we'll know the route. If someone else follows, they'll know we were here." Cal watched her work. It was simple, methodical, and impossible to miss. It was the kind of thing that turned intention into evidence, that made the invisible visible. He realized that everything Tala did, every mark, every entry, every witness signature was designed to outlast her presence. She was building a record that could survive without her. They reached the edge of the basin by late morning. The town of Driscoll sat in a shallow bowl surrounded by low mesas, its buildings clustered around a central square and a stone well. Smoke rose from a few chimneys. The main street was quiet mid-morning on a weekday, with most people at work or home. Cal and Tala rode past the livery stable and the general store, past the land office and the doctor's shingle, and stopped in front of the sheriff's office. Sheriff Ames was sitting on the porch, a tin cup in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. He looked up as they dismounted, his gaze moving from Cal to Tala and back again. "Trouble?" he asked. "Complaint," Cal said. "Filed 2 days ago. Tala and I are here to give testimony." Ames set down his cup and stood. He was a compact man in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of steady expression that came from years of sorting truth from noise. He had been sheriff for 12 years, and in that time he had earned a reputation for fairness that no amount of money could buy or bend. "Come inside," he said. The office was small and plain. A desk, 2 chairs, a gun rack, a filing cabinet. Ames gestured for them to sit, then took his own seat behind the desk. He opened the filing cabinet and pulled out a folder marked with Tala's name. Complaint filed by Tala Whitfield, he read aloud. Alleges illegal water extraction by Silas Dorn at 3 locations along the eastern aquifer. Witness list includes 2 freight haulers, 1 land surveyor, and 1 county water inspector. Hearing scheduled for tomorrow at noon, presided over by Judge Carver. Public record, open attendance. He looked up. That about cover it? Yes, Tala said. Ames leaned back in his chair. Dorn's lawyer is already asking for a postponement. Says he needs more time to review the evidence. Judge denied it. Said the complaint was filed properly, and the evidence list was clear. Dorn doesn't get extra time just because he doesn't like the calendar. Cal felt a small measure of tension release. The system was holding. Not perfectly, not forever. But for now, it was doing what it was supposed to do. Treating people equally under a set of rules that applied to everyone. What do you need from us? He asked. Stay visible, Ames said. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't take meetings in places I can't vouch for. And if Dorn or his people try to talk to you before the hearing, you tell them to go through the court. Understood? Understood, Cal said. Ames turned to Tala. Doc Lark is 2 doors down. She'll want to look at that shoulder. I'll walk with you. Tala hesitated. I can manage. I know you can, Ames said. I'm walking anyway. The 3 of them left the office and crossed the street to a small building with a sign that read Lark Medical. Dr. Eleanor Lark met them at the door. She was a tall woman in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back and hands that moved with practiced economy. She had studied medicine in Boston and had chosen to practice in Driscoll because, as she once told Cal, the need was real and the work was honest. Sheriff, she said, what do we have? Shoulder injury, Ames said. Needs a look before tomorrow's hearing. Lark nodded and gestured for Tala to come inside. I'll ask before I touch, she said, and I'll talk you through each step. Sound good? Yes, Tala said. Cal waited on the porch with Ames, while Lark examined Tala's shoulder. Through the window, he could see Lark pointing to the injury, asking questions, waiting for answers. It took 20 minutes. When Tala emerged, her shoulder was freshly bandaged and her expression was calm. Clean wound, Lark said to Ames. No infection. She'll want to keep it still for another week, but it won't slow her down tomorrow. Appreciate it, Ames said. They walked back toward the square. Ames stopped at the well and gestured toward a large board mounted on the side of the general store. Public notice board, he said. Ruth at the land office posts the hearing schedule there every morning. Your names are on it. So is Dorn's. So is the witness list. Everyone in town will know what's happening and when. Cal looked at the board. The notice was written in clear block letters. Water rights hearing, tomorrow, noon, county courthouse. Below it, the names were listed in alphabetical order. No hierarchy, no emphasis, just the facts presented without decoration or apology. Dorn's going to push back, Ames said. He'll call it a misunderstanding, a paperwork error, a bureaucratic mix-up. He'll bring character witnesses and property deeds, and maybe even a civil engineer. You need to be ready for that. We are, Tala said. Ames looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, get some rest. I'll see you at noon tomorrow. Cal and Tala walked to the boarding house at the north end of town. The proprietor, a woman named Iris Calhoun, showed them to 2 separate rooms on the 2nd floor, each with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the street. Cal paid for both rooms and carried his saddlebags upstairs. He washed his face and hands, ate a piece of hardtack, and lay down on the bed. His body was tired, but his mind was still moving, reviewing the ledger, the map, the testimony they would need to give. He thought about the way Dorn's lawyer would try to discredit Tala, to paint her as confused or mistaken or motivated by some imagined grievance. He thought about the way systems could bend under pressure, the way truth could be delayed and diluted until it stopped mattering. But he also thought about Sheriff Ames walking them to the doctor's office, about Judge Carver denying the postponement, about Ruth at the land office posting the names in alphabetical order. Small actions, small refusals to let the process break. Not heroic, just steady. It was enough to let him sleep. The afternoon passed quietly. Cal woke near sunset and went downstairs to the dining room. Tala was already there, sitting at a corner table with a plate of beans and cornbread. Cal ordered the same and sat across from her. They ate in silence for a while. Then Tala pulled out the ledger and opened it to a page near the middle. Porter Dorn's lawyer will try to say the dates don't match, she said. He'll say I could have written these entries any time, that there's no way to prove when the ink went on the page. Can the county clerk date the paper stock? Cal asked. Yes, Tala said. Ruth already checked. The paper was sold by the general store, and they keep inventory records. The batch I used was sold between March and June. That matches the dates in the ledger. What about the witnesses? Cal asked. They'll testify in person, Tala said. Porter can cross-examine them, but their stories won't change. They saw what they saw, and they have no reason to lie. Cal nodded. He thought about the freight haulers' men who lived by reputation, who moved goods across the territory on the strength of their word. They would not risk that for a stranger, and they would not risk it for money. Their testimony would hold. What about the soil compression data? He asked. Lloyd Finch will present it, Tala said. He's the county water inspector. He measured the ground at all 3 siphon sites and compared it to undisturbed areas nearby. The compression patterns are consistent with recent installation within the last year. That matches the dates in the ledger. Cal looked at her. You've thought this through. I had to, Tala said. If I didn't, I wouldn't be here. They finished their meal and returned to their rooms. Cal lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the town, voices in the street, a dog barking, the creak of a wagon passing by. He thought about what would happen if they lost tomorrow, if the judge ruled in Dorn's favor, if the evidence was dismissed, if the whole thing fell apart. He thought about the water still draining from the aquifer, the pressure still dropping in the downstream wells, the farmers and ranchers still waiting for rain that might not come. He thought about the way injustice compounded over time, each small failure building on the last until the weight became too much to carry. But he also thought about the ledger lying on the table downstairs, the map folded in Tala's pack, the witness statements filed at the land office. He thought about the system that had allowed the complaint to be filed, the hearing to be scheduled, the evidence to be entered. It was not perfect, but it was not nothing. It was a chance. He closed his eyes and slept. The town square was fuller the next morning. Word had spread. People gathered in small clusters near the well, speaking in low tones, glancing toward the courthouse. Some were there to support Tala, some to support Dorn, and some just to see how it would turn out. Cal and Tala ate breakfast in the boarding house. Dining room, eggs, toast, coffee, and reviewed the ledger one last time. Tala ran her finger down the columns, cross-checking dates and flow rates, making sure every entry was in order. Cal watched her work and felt a kind of respect that had nothing to do with agreement or affection. It was the respect that came from watching someone carry a hard thing without complaint. At 11:30, they walked to the courthouse. Sheriff Ames was waiting on the steps, along with Ruth from the land office and Elder Thomas Nallen, a wiry man in his 70s who wore a beaded vest and carried a carved walking stick. Nallen greeted Tala in her own language, a brief exchange that Cal did not understand but recognized as formal. Tala replied, and Nallen nodded. The water markers you found, Nallen said, switching to English, they match the old boundary stones my grandfather set. That means the aquifer rights are governed by the 1873 treaty, not by territorial land law. Dorn doesn't get to ignore that. Ruth pulled out a folder and showed them a survey map from 1873. The boundary stones were marked in red ink, and the treaty language was printed along the margin. Shared water, managed access, no diversion without council consent. The words were plain and unambiguous. This will be entered as evidence, Ruth said, along with the ledger, the witness statements, and the soil compression analysis from the county inspector. At noon, Judge Carver called the hearing to order. The courtroom was plain, wooden benches, a raised platform for the judge, a table for each party. Silas Dorn sat at the defendant's table with his lawyer, a man named Porter who wore a press suit and a skeptical expression. Tala and Cal sat at the plaintiff's table with Ruth and Elder Nallen. The benches behind them were filled with townspeople, freight haulers, farmers, and ranch hands, people who understood that water was not an abstract legal concept but the difference between survival and failure. Judge Carver was a woman in her 60s, her gray hair pinned up, her eyes sharp. She had presided over water rights cases for 20 years and had earned a reputation for precision and impartiality. She looked at both tables and said, "We're here to determine whether Silas Dorn violated territorial water law and the 1873 treaty by installing unauthorized siphons on the eastern aquifer. The plaintiff will present evidence first." "Proceed." Ruth stood and entered the ledger into evidence. She read 3 entries aloud, citing dates, flow rates, and witness signatures. She then entered the survey map and pointed out the boundary stones. Finally, she called the county water inspector, a man named Lloyd Finch, who testified that he had examined the 3 siphon sites and found iron residue, soil compression consistent with recent installation, and pressure drops in downstream wells that correlated with the dates in the ledger. Porter cross-examined Finch, asking whether the pressure drops could have been caused by drought, by increased usage, by natural aquifer depletion. Finch answered each question with measured patience. The rainfall data showed no significant drought, the usage records showed no unusual increase, and the depletion rate was consistent with normal seasonal variation except at the 3 points where the siphons had been installed. The numbers told a clear story, and Finch had brought the raw data to back it up. Porter then called Dorn to the stand. Dorn testified that he had installed the pipes to water his freight yard and that he believed the water rights were included in his property deed. He said he had acted in good faith, had hired a contractor, had paid for materials. He did not deny the pipes existed. He denied only that they were illegal. "The deed I purchased," Dorn said, "included water access. I assumed that meant I could draw from the aquifer." "Did you file for a permit?" Judge Carver asked. "No, Your Honor," Dorn said. "I didn't think I needed one." "Did you consult the treaty map?" Carver asked. "No, Your Honor." "Did you speak with the tribal council or the land office before installation?" "No, Your Honor." Carver made a note. Porter called a civil engineer who testified that the siphon design was standard and that the installation had been done professionally. He did not dispute the locations or the lack of permits. He focused instead on the technical quality of the work, as if that somehow mitigated the legal problem. Tala took the stand next. Porter asked her how she had obtained the water markers, how she knew the locations were accurate, how she could be certain the siphons belonged to Dorn. Tala answered each question without hesitation. She had walked the boundary, she had cross-checked the markers with the treaty map, she had observed Dorn's contractors installing the pipes, and had documented the dates and times in her ledger. She had spoken with downstream well owners who reported pressure drops that began immediately after the installations. She had collected soil samples and submitted them to Lloyd Finch for analysis. Porter leaned forward. "Miss Whitfield, how do we know you didn't fabricate these records to settle a personal grudge?" Tala looked at him. "You can check the ink," she said. "The county clerk's office can date the paper stock. You can interview the witnesses, men who have no reason to lie and every reason to avoid this courtroom. And you can look at the soil compression data, which matches the dates in my ledger, within a 3-day margin. That's not fabrication. That's documentation." Porter had no response. He sat down. Judge Carver reviewed the evidence. She asked Ruth to clarify the treaty language. She asked Finch to explain the pressure drop calculations. She asked Nolan to confirm that the boundary markers had not been moved. Then she looked at Dorn. "Mr. Dorn," she said, "the evidence is clear. You installed unauthorized siphons on protected aquifer land. Whether you believed you had the right is immaterial. The treaty is explicit, and the water law is explicit. You will remove the siphons within 30 days. You will pay restitution to the affected downstream user's calculation to be determined by County Water Office. And you will issue a public retraction of any statements that misrepresented Miss Whitfield's testimony. Do you understand?" Dorn's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Carver struck her gavel once. "This hearing is concluded. The ruling will be entered into public record by end of business today." The courtroom emptied slowly. People stopped to shake Tala's hand, to nod at Cal, to speak quietly with Elder Nolan. Sheriff Ames stood by the door and made sure no one lingered too long or pressed too close. Outside, the sun was high and hot. Cal and Tala walked to the well, drew a bucket of water, and drank from the same ladle. The water was cool and clean. It tasted like what it was, a thing that belonged to everyone and no one, a thing that required care. That evening, Cal and Tala returned to the boarding house. They sat on the porch and watched the sun go down. The town was quieter now, the tension of the hearing dissipating into the routines of supper and evening chores. A freight wagon rolled past, its driver nodding to them as he went by. A woman swept the steps of the general store. A child ran down the street, chasing a dog. "What happens now?" Cal asked. "We wait," Tala said. "Dorn has 30 days to remove the siphons. The county water office has 30 days to calculate restitution. And the land office has 30 days to post the ruling in every town that draws from the aquifer. And if Dorn doesn't comply, then the sheriff enforces the order," Tala said. "And if the sheriff can't, the territorial marshal does. The system has teeth." Cal nodded. He believed her, but he also knew that enforcement was a question of will as much as law. Dorn had money, influence, and patience. He would test every step, looking for the place where the system would bend or break. "I'll stay until it's done," Cal said. Tala looked at him. "You don't have to." "I know," Cal said, "but I'm going to." 3 weeks later, the siphons were gone. County inspectors documented the removal and tested the downstream wells. Pressure returned to normal levels within 10 days. The soil around the installation points was raked smooth and left to settle. Dorn paid the restitution $2,200 divided among 6 households and issued a 1-paragraph statement in the town newspaper acknowledging the court's findings. He did not apologize, but he did not contest. The statement was dry and factual, and it was entered into the public record alongside the hearing transcript. Cal and Tala returned to the aquifer boundary with shovels, stakes, and cans of blue paint. They walked the line together, Tala pointing out the old markers and Cal driving new stakes into the ground at 50-foot intervals. They painted the tops of the stakes blue so they would be visible from a distance, even in low light or from horseback. They built small cairns at the 3 former siphon sites, each cairn 3 stones high, each stone chosen for weight and stability. The cairns were simple monuments, marking the places where water had been taken and then returned. "These will last 100 years if people leave them alone," Tala said. "And if they don't?" Cal asked. "Then we build them again," Tala said. They worked through the afternoon, moving slowly, stopping to drink water and check the map. The work was repetitive and physical, the kind of labor that left the mind free to wander. Cal thought about the hearing, about the way the evidence had held up under scrutiny, about the way the judge had ruled without hesitation or equivocation. He thought about the people who had made it possible. Ruth filing the paperwork, Ames providing security, Lark documenting the injury, Finch analyzing the soil. None of them had done anything extraordinary. They had simply done their jobs, and in doing so, they had made justice possible. By the time they finished, the sun was low and the air was cooling. They stood at the western boundary marker and looked back along the line of blue stakes. It was a small thing, just paint and wood and stone, but it was also a line that said, "This far, no farther, not without asking." A week later, Elder Nolan called a meeting at the town hall. He invited the freight haulers, the farmers, the ranch hands, and the water office staff. He invited Dorn, who did not come. He invited Cal and Tala, who did. 40 people showed up, filling the benches and standing along the walls. Nolan stood at the front of the room and spoke. "We're here to talk about how we manage water going forward. Not just this aquifer, but all the sources we share. The law says we need permits. The treaty says we need consent. But what we really need is a way to make sure everyone knows the rules and everyone has a voice in how they're enforced." He proposed a water council, a rotating group of stakeholders who would meet quarterly to review usage, inspect infrastructure, and hear complaints. The council would include representatives from the freight companies, the farms, the ranches, and the tribal council. Decisions would be made by majority vote, with Elder Nolan holding a tiebreaker in cases of deadlock. The room debated for 2 hours. Some people wanted stricter enforcement. Some wanted more flexibility. Some wanted the whole system handed over to the county, and some wanted the county kept out entirely. The arguments were sharp, but not personal. People listened, responded, adjusted their positions. Slowly, a consensus